Richard Lawson had built his life on luxury and success in New York City, yet beneath the glamour lay a hollow emptiness that had haunted him since the tragic death of his wife, Emily, 23 years ago. Despite the accolades and bustling business meetings, his heart remained shattered, confined to a routine of solitary visits to Emily's grave, a ritual that both comforted and tormented him. One rainy morning, as the city wept along with him, Richard noticed a young woman huddled under a shop awning. Clutching a baby in her arms, she appeared fragile and lost amid the downpour. Moved by an inexplicable compassion, Richard withdrew some cash from his wallet and handed it to her, urging her to buy food. Although he was not accustomed to engaging with strangers in distress, something in her quiet vulnerability stirred a long-forgotten tenderness within him. Later that day, as he made his customary pilgrimage to Emily's grave, Richard was startled to see the same young woman kneeling by the headstone. Confused and hesitant, he approached her. "You were here yesterday," he said, his voice trembling with shock and curiosity. With red-rimmed eyes and a quavering tone, she replied, "Emily. She was my mother." In that moment, Richard's world tilted. He had never imagined that Emily had kept such a profound secret. The young woman, who introduced herself as Sophie, explained that Emily had hidden her existence for years, perhaps out of a misguided desire to protect Richard from additional pain. Raised by another family and left with only fragments of her true past, Sophie had spent her life piecing together her identity, which now revolved around the mystery of her mother's choices. Overwhelmed by the revelation, Richard felt a tumult of emotions: betrayal, sorrow, and a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the family he had long mourned could be reclaimed. In the solitude of his apartment later that night, he revisited old mementos, faded photographs, love letters, and even Emily's journal. As he read through those delicate pages, he discovered entries where Emily revealed her deepest fears. In her elegant handwriting, she confessed that the thought of a child had terrified her. She had hidden her pregnancy because she believed that burdening Richard, a man so consumed by his work and ambition, would only shatter the fragile balance of their lives. In the days that followed, Richard and Sophie began a cautious conversation. Their encounters were filled with raw emotion, every word a mix of unspoken questions and shared grief. Sophie recounted her childhood, the loneliness of wondering why her existence had been concealed, while Richard struggled to reconcile the image of the woman he loved with the secrets she had harbored. Despite the pain, their discussions kindled the possibility of a new future, a future that included not only Sophie but also her young son, Daniel. One afternoon, while sharing coffee in a quiet, intimate cafe, Sophie revealed more about Emily's hidden struggles. She passed Richard a worn copy of Emily's journal, which detailed not only mundane moments but also the profound internal conflict that had tormented her. Emily had written about her fear of how a child would change everything, her belief that protecting Richard from this truth was an act of love. Richard's heart ached as he recalled a careless remark he'd made in his youth, a comment about not being ready for children. He now realized that, in Emily's eyes, that moment had been enough to seal their fate. Yet the revelations continued. Later, Sophie presented Richard with a faded letter she had found among Emily's belongings. The letter, penned in Emily's unmistakable hand, was addressed not to him but to a man named James Porter, a name that stirred memories of Richard's younger days. James had once been a close friend, someone he had trusted implicitly. The letter revealed that before Richard and Emily's lives had fully intertwined, Emily and James had shared a brief, complicated romance. In the letter, Emily confessed that she had hidden her pregnancy out of fear of how Richard would react, a decision meant to spare him additional grief but which instead robbed him of the chance to share in the joy of a family. Crushed by the discovery, Richard's emotions swirled between anger and disbelief. Unable to let the matter rest, he reached out to James. The ensuing phone call was a bitter confrontation. James admitted that his involvement with Emily had been a fleeting mistake, a brief affair that had ended long before Richard and Emily had even considered a future together. He explained that, driven by youthful fear and a misguided desire to protect Richard, both he and Emily had chosen silence over truth. Although James's words dripped with regret, they did little to alleviate the deep sense of betrayal Richard felt. In the weeks that followed, Richard wrestled with the painful revelations. The man who had once cloaked himself in solitude now found himself standing at a crossroads. The secrets of Emily's past had shattered the comforting illusions of his earlier life, but they also opened a door to a future he had never imagined, a future that included Sophie and her son, Daniel. The possibility of forming a family, long relegated to a dream, now glimmered with a fragile light. Slowly, Richard reached out to Sophie, determined to forge a connection despite the lingering shadows of betrayal. Their meetings, though initially marked by awkward silences and guarded words, gradually blossomed into something tender and real. They strolled through parks and sat in cozy corners of quiet cafes, sharing memories and exploring the delicate threads of their newfound bond. With every encounter, Richard's bitterness softened, replaced by a cautious hope that this second chance might mend the broken pieces of his heart. One crisp morning, Richard accompanied Sophie and Daniel to a pediatrician's appointment. As he sat in the waiting room, he watched Daniel's bright eyes and tentative smiles, and a warmth he hadn't felt in years began to take root. In those seemingly ordinary moments, the soft chatter in the room, the quiet concern of Sophie as she comforted Daniel, Richard discovered a profound joy in simply being present. The child, with his innocent wonder, represented the family Richard had never known he could have. Slowly, he began to envision a future where he could be both a father and a grandfather, a role that filled him with both trepidation and hope. Their journey toward healing was not without its setbacks. Each conversation about Emily, every reminiscence of the past, sometimes dredged up fresh waves of pain. Yet, through patient dialogue and mutual vulnerability, Richard and Sophie slowly built a fragile, yet genuine relationship. Sophie, who had guarded her feelings for so long, began to trust Richard. She admitted her own fears and regrets, sharing how the mystery of her origin had shaped her life and left her yearning for answers. Richard, in turn, revealed the depths of his loneliness and the unspoken longing for a family he had suppressed for decades. In quiet moments spent on park benches near a shimmering lake, the two often discussed the possibility of rebuilding their lives together. Richard would speak of the endless nights he had spent mourning Emily and the dreams he had long buried under the weight of loss. Sophie listened with empathy, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and a budding hope. "We can't change the past," she would say gently, "but we can choose to embrace what the future holds." Her words resonated deeply with Richard, who realized that the true measure of love was not in perfection, but in the willingness to forgive and move forward. One particularly poignant evening, as the city's skyline blushed with the fading light of dusk, Richard sat alone in his apartment reflecting on his transformation. The solitude that had once defined him was now replaced by a sense of connection, a quiet contentment that came from accepting his role in a family he had never expected. Though he still visited Emily's grave, those visits had taken on a new meaning. They were no longer solely an act of mourning but a tribute to the complexity of love, a love that had once been his entire world and now, despite its imperfections, had paved the way for a renewed sense of purpose. In the months that followed, Richard dedicated himself to nurturing this unexpected family. He read stories to Daniel, played in the park, and savored the simple, everyday moments that gradually healed old wounds. Each shared laugh, every tender smile, served as a reminder that life could be rebuilt, even after it had been shattered by secrets and silence. The trust between him and Sophie grew stronger with each passing day. Together, they discovered that forgiveness was not a destination but a journey, a series of small, significant steps taken hand in hand. Even as the past continued to cast its long shadow, Richard learned to live with the bittersweet truth that some mysteries might never be fully resolved. The painful revelations about Emily's affair with James Porter and the secret she had kept were chapters of his life that he could no longer change. Yet, in accepting those truths, he found the strength to look ahead. The once overwhelming grief gave way to a measured hope, one that allowed him to envision a future filled with new possibilities, a future where he could finally be the father and grandfather he had longed to be. One late autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted softly to the ground, Richard, Sophie, and Daniel sat together on a weathered bench overlooking a tranquil pond. The quiet beauty of the scene mirrored the fragile harmony that had begun to form between them. Richard spoke softly of his dreams for the future, a life defined not by the betrayals of the past, but by the promise of healing and renewed love. Sophie listened, her eyes moist with both reflection and hope. "We have a chance," she whispered, "to build something real, something that honors all that we have lost and all that we can still become." In that simple moment, with the cool breeze carrying away the remnants of old sorrow, Richard felt a profound shift within him. The future, though uncertain, now held the promise of belonging and connection. With Sophie and Daniel by his side, he embraced the notion that life, despite its scars, could be reimagined. The pain of yesterday would always be a part of him, but it no longer had the power to define his everyday. Standing on the threshold of this new beginning, Richard vowed to cherish each moment, to build a home filled with love and laughter, and to honor the memory of Emily not with regret, but with gratitude for the life that had led him to this unexpected family. As the city lights began to twinkle in the encroaching dusk, Richard allowed himself to believe in the future, a future where hope and forgiveness could transform even the deepest wounds into a legacy of love.